Hi, Jamie Cowen here to talk with you today about are all politicians corrupt? Now I know that sounds pretty cynical, but many people believe this, especially now. But honestly, it's not true. How do I know? Well, it actually says so in the Bible regarding the prophet Daniel when he served as one of the 3 governors over the Persian Empire. In fact, this was attested to by his opponents who sought to undermine him. It says the following in Daniel, quote, "At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent." So it is possible for a politician to be a person of integrity. In fact, I would say that most politicians are not corrupt. First, let's define corruption. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines it as dishonest or illegal behavior by powerful people such as government officials. This means, in context of a politician, one who puts his or her personal interests above that of the constituents that they serve. We could call it self-dealing. As I've shared before, I've been around politicians most of my life. Most of them are dedicated public servants, yet the temptations for corruption are immense. Wherever there's money and power, the potential for corruption exists. We see it in play in the Bible, when the devil tempts Yeshua by offering him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory if he would just serve the devil. Of course, Yeshua rebuked him for even the thought. But this was essentially the same deal offered to and accepted by Faust in the Middle Age legend, which I discussed in my message, The Faustian Bargain. Putting things into perspective in today's world, U.S. senators, for example, earn $179,000 a year. Now, for most of us, that's a lot of money. However, consider this. If they moved into the private sector, they would make 2 to 5 times as much. In addition, most members of Congress have 2 houses, one in their home districts and one in the Washington, D.C. area. For that reason alone, some members of Congress actually sleep in their offices just to save money. In addition, running for federal office is unbelievably expensive. The average cost to run for a House of Representatives seat every 2 years is $1.5 million. For the Senate, every 6 years, it's $10 million. Where does the money come from? Constituents, lobbying organizations, political action committees, independent groups supporting a particular candidate or cause, and for wealthy candidates from their own pockets. But sadly, instead of legislating or representing constituent interests, many politicians are forced to spend an inordinate amount of time on fundraising. This puts them into serious compromising situations. The Congress, the White House, and all the states have laws against bribery and self-dealing. All have ethics offices where presumably elected officials can check on what's permissible or not. But that doesn't always help well-meaning politicians. One of the more recent corruption cases involved former Governor McDonnell from Virginia. Governor McDonnell at one time was on the short list of vice presidential candidates for the 2012 Mitt Romney campaign for president. McDonnell and his wife received gifts from a Virginia businessman. This businessman owned a company that produced a dietary supplement. He wanted the governor's help in pushing state universities to test the product. The governor ultimately hosted a reception in the governor's mansion for the businessman to hawk his wares to health officials, and then contacted some of Virginia's universities to help set up meetings between him and the university officials. Federal prosecutors brought a case against McDonnell under federal bribery statutes, for which he was convicted. McDonnell appealed the case all the way up to the Supreme Court, which in a unanimous decision overturned the conviction. The Supreme Court explained the decision with the following, quote, "Conscientious public officials arrange meetings for constituents, contact other officials on their behalf, and include them in events all of the time," unquote. The court concluded that while the actions of McDonnell were tawdry, they were not illegal. This case showcases the conflicts that politicians have with attending to constituent concerns surrounded by lots of money. Politicians are often taken out to dinner, or shows, or ball games, or trips by lobbyists. Why? To build relationships and get the ear of the politician. My father was a lobbyist for a television network, and he did this all the time. In fact, when I worked on Capitol Hill, I was often invited to similar functions. Is it corrupt? No, but it certainly raises the specter of corruption. An honest politician seeks to avoid conflicts of interest. I well remember a conversation that I had with my former boss, a U.S. Senator. He had recently joined the Senate Commerce Committee, which, among other things, oversees the television industry. I said to him in passing, "My dad will be glad to see you join the committee." He didn't respond. Thinking he didn't hear me, I said it again. He didn't respond. Suddenly, I realized for him to acknowledge a connection between me and my father, the television lobbyist, would be a serious conflict of interest. That's integrity. What should we expect from politicians? Well, number one, the truth. After the Watergate affair and President Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter ran for a president on a platform saying he would always tell the truth. That's quite the contrast to today. The Bible demands that we speak the truth, and the truth will set us free. Number two, the divestment or putting into trust all financial holdings that could be within the purview of the politician's jurisdiction. Former Presidents Reagan, Clinton, and both Bushes put their holdings into blind trusts to avoid the perception of impropriety. Actually, most government officials are required to do so. The one exception happens to be the president. Number three, putting national interest above personal interests. Remember John F. Kennedy's famous words during his inauguration speech? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Based on that slogan, Kennedy proposed and the Congress enacted the Peace Corps, which helped and continues to help multiple countries around the world and has brought goodwill to the United States. Based on the axiom of putting national interest above personal interest, President Ford pardoned former President Nixon. At the time, the famous Watergate journalist Bob Woodward was highly critical, believing the pardon was the last straw of corruption. Nixon hands over the presidency to Ford because of his Watergate crimes and in turn is pardoned. However, 25 years later, Woodward was writing a book on the era, interviewed Ford and asked him why he pardoned Nixon. Ford's answer? I pardoned Nixon, not for Nixon, but for the good of the country. In other words, to avoid dragging out the Watergate drama for several more years. Woodward later said that Ford's act was an act of courage. Ford knew the decision was unpopular, and it likely led to his defeat in the following election. That's putting national interests above personal interests. Number four, admission when confronted with wrongdoing. One of the most famous political disclosures came in the 1884 presidential campaign of Grover Cleveland. Shortly after his nomination to be the Democratic candidate, a newspaper published an expose that he had fathered a child out of wedlock. Unlike numerous politicians today, Cleveland readily admitted the fact and explained that he was a bachelor at the time and had paid child support for the child. He told his campaign managers to always tell the truth. He was lauded for his honesty, and he won the election. This is an example of the wisdom of the text in Proverbs, which says, quote, whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy, unquote. This is quite the contrast to Bill Clinton's campaign manager's James Carville's statements about Clinton, where he says we needed to control the bimbo eruptions, or more recent revelations of payoffs to prostitutes and others to keep quiet about promiscuous affairs. Look, in reality, politics is a noble profession. Most politicians have served with great distinction. None are perfect, but we should expect and demand integrity in those who lead us. For those who don't, the Bible has a clear answer. Your sin will find you out. Thank you, and see you next time.